Welcome to Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring authentic stories of personal growth and lessons learned from people living true to themselves with creativity, passion, and purpose. For all past episodes, subscribe on iTunes or visit noscheduleman.com. And please connect, share, and contribute with a comment, rating, or review. And now, here's your host, the No Schedule Man, Kevin Bulmer.
I've been known to struggle with reality. Not that it is any real mystery.
The question this week is, how do I create a life that I love? In business or in life, same question. Same thing, in fact. Same principles. How do I create a life that I love? And then, how do I build a plan to achieve that while taking total responsibility for each and every step, past, present, and future? Welcome. I'm Kevin Bulmer. This is Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring conversations on personal and professional growth, authentically sharing in an effort to empower each other. You can find all past episodes of this podcast worldwide on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and at noschedulemanpodcast.com. And if you're in the United States, you can find the show on iHeartRadio and Google Play Music. If you find it helpful, I hope you'll subscribe and stay the course with us. I also invite you to stay up to date by joining my free email newsletter. You can find that at kevinbulmer.com. If it's easier to remember, just go to noscheduleman.com. Both of those web addresses will take you to the same place. This week, I recommend you buckle up and pay attention because the insights are going to come at you fast and furious, not because of me, but because of our guest. This week, we're joined by Dan Martell, an award-winning entrepreneur and founder of Clarity, which is a venture-backed startup that he built to make it easy to connect with top business minds over the phone. It was recently acquired by Fundable. Dan previously co-founded Flowtown, a San Francisco-based social marketing product which raised funding, grew to over 50,000 customers, and in 2011 was acquired by Demandforce. In 2012, Dan was named Canada's top angel investor, having completed over 33 investments with amazing companies like Udemy, Intercom, and Unbounce. Dan is passionate about sharing everything he knows to help other people, especially in the art and creativity of business and entrepreneurship. But he's also just as passionate, if not more so, about helping at-risk teens. And you're going to hear why, as Dan shares very openly about his experiences, both good and challenging. To put it plainly, Dan had a really bumpy ride as a younger person with an ADHD diagnosis, foster homes, misbehavior, a high-speed car chase, a gun, and a stay at a youth drug addiction rehabilitation center called Portage. Now, Dan tells that story in our conversation, so I'm not going to go any further into it here, but it's an extraordinary story that I think we all need to hear. Now, normally, with any of these podcast episodes, I choose 3 key points to listen to or to listen for going into the conversation. I tried to do that with Dan with what he shared, but there's just too much here to narrow it down to 3. This conversation, at least for me, was a rocket ride of insight. For about the next 40 minutes, you're going to experience that. So I encourage you to dig right into what he has to say. As I said at the outset, it comes fast and furious, and it's all really great stuff. But among the many key things that stood out to me from what Dan mentioned in the conversation were the lighthouse and the tugboat, his analogy about whether you're focused on showing possibility or just enabling behavior that ultimately will need to be changed. Guess which one is which, the lighthouse or the tugboat? Tough love and accountability versus responsibility. He talked about the only person that you're ever competing against is yourself from yesterday. Consider that for a moment, because we're in a look-around society at what everybody else is doing, and we measure ourselves against what we think that standard is, and Dan says, and I quite agree with him, the only person you're ever competing against is yourself from yesterday. And to see if you can be just 1% better today and the next day and the next day, and how quickly you end up doubling your effectiveness. He goes over that in this conversation. He talked about the power of ignorance in getting started. I would call this, don't let what you don't know stop you or slow you down. He also talked about the fire that some at-risk teens and young people have, that if it could just be channeled, this is the kind of stuff that scares some people. Troubled teens, troubled youth. Dan sees it differently. he sees a fire that, if it could be channeled, could lead to great things. He says that they've just got this I don't give an F, to use his phrase, nature, that many of the rest of us, ironically, try to learn later. I would put myself into this camp of actively trying to learn not to care so much about what others are going to say when you know that you're authentically pursuing your own path. Dan recognizes that there are some people that we might view as troubled or at risk that already have that. Got a passion and that if they could just channel it into something good. Boy, oh boy, you can really see some magic happen like what Dan exhibits. He talked about responsibility of believing in yourself and aligning your actions with your new belief. He said it's empowering, exciting, and scary. This is all really great stuff. When you start to believe in yourself a little bit more and change the script of what you think you're capable of, well, then you get a shimmer of discomfort because you think to yourself, wait a second, I'm going to have to start acting differently if I'm going to be in line what I'm saying I believe about myself now. Dan covers that. And he's always asking what's the motivation behind the goal. It's the same in business as in life. And he gives an example of a guy, just to listen for this, who wanted to build a $100 million company. Listen for that and to what Dan revealed, that what the real motivation was with that, because I think it's indicative of so many people that want to set a goal or achieve in business or whatever it is that they think is their measurement of success. And Dan has a unique way of being able to dig into what the actual motivation is, and I think that that example is a perfect illustration of what it's really all about. I caught up with Dan in Toronto recently for this conversation. What you're about to hear is pretty much the extent of the whole visit. We caught up just a little bit before we started, but then we got right into this conversation. And moments after it was done, he and his videographer, they were gone, out the room, on the way to catch a plane to LA. But the fact that Dan is so completely present and engaged in this conversation, I believe, tells you a lot about who he is. Here is Dan Martell on Journeys with the No Schedule Man. Dan, for you, what's the distance between, or what was the distance between somebody telling you for the first time that they believed in you and you believing in yourself?
It's a great question, because I think as you get older, you kind of forget, or you romanticize kind of how things came to be. You know, I had somebody, you know, I went through a lot of challenging times as a teenager. Had a guy that pulled me out of essentially solitary confinement. I was in jail for the second time. You know, I was a drug addict and broke the law and was sentenced at an adult facility, and had a guard kind of sit me down in the guards unit. So I would never been in that spot before, and kind of look in my eyes and ask me what I was doing there. And so that was my moment of him just saying, you know, if this is the first time you've ever heard this, I just want you to know that I believe in you. And I know there's other people over the years that have said something like that. You know, I've been in therapy since I was like a teenager, like 12, 13 years old. I had a lot of caring adults try to support me in, you know, foster care and whatnot, but there was just something about somebody that had no reason whatsoever to sit me down, to say that to me, that I knew other people like me, that made me feel like there was a reason why they were saying that. So that was the first time I felt it. And then in regards to the moment that I could then, I guess, internalize that and believe it, it took months, and I think it was just degrees of, right? So, you know, shortly after that, I got released to a place called Portage, which was a therapeutic community for adolescents with drug addiction. And I spent 11 months in therapy trying to learn about myself and what made me tick and how my feelings worked, and, you know, rebuilt the relationship with my family and all the people I'd burned their trust, and eventually ended up discovering computer programming, which had a huge impact on my life and my career as an entrepreneur. And I would say it was just over time, you know, not only having that spark of somewhat of a belief, to then having actions that I was taking reinforce that belief for me to kind of continue creating essentially a snowball of self-worth, of confidence, of tenacity, really, to just, I mean, the crazy part is when you've come from nothing, there's not a lot of expectations for you. And it's actually quite a beautiful thing to have, right? It's kind of the power of ignorance when you start something new. And I just think it was something that's continued to grow over the years. And that's kind of why I'm where I'm at today, is just that continued belief in the right decision that speaks to my soul. And when it does, I always say yes.
How did it feel, as best you can recollect, when you started to internalize that on your own, not just take that from an external source? If somebody says, no, I see a light there. You might not see it, but I see it, and I'm going to show it to you, and I'm going to remind you until you acknowledge it. What do you remember about the realization of realizing for yourself, gosh, you know what? He's right. There is a light in there. What'd that feel like?
I mean, the first time it happened, I just broke down, because to me, that was one of the first times in my whole life that I ever felt it. And I guess there was also this part of me that kind of felt scared, because once I believed it a little bit, then I felt like my actions weren't aligned with what he was saying, right? If I didn't belong in that place, then clearly the decisions I had to make were going to be dramatically different than the ones I'd made up to that point in my life. And I think that, now that I think of it, it's almost that change in belief of my self-worth, my value, that allowed me to make a different set of decisions, changing my peer group, going back to high school, graduating with honors, deciding to go into computing and not botany, even though I had a real passion for plants and that kind of sort of things. I don't know. It's just, it felt empowering. It felt exciting. It felt scary. I don't know. I think that a big part of me kind of always knew there was something inside that I was capable of doing something great. But in admitting that, clearly my actions weren't aligned with that.
Ever since I saw you speak in Toronto a while back, I've wondered how much, if at all, you wonder inside yourself when you constantly, I'm guessing, get people reaching out to you and looking to you, the Dan Martell that they see now, and wanting advice in your clarity sessions and in response to all the content that you put out for scaling their business, issues with their software, which way they should go, marketing their product. And I wonder, again, how, if at all, how often you maybe look at that and see that sort of 50,000-foot stuff and maybe wonder yourself, do you know who you are? Like, is the light on in there before we get into all of this stuff?
And in your context of that question is, do I think that about those people asking the question?
Even just wondering where they are, what's their journey, and because people are seeing the built-out Dan Martell Corporation.
Yeah.
But I knew, because I was in the room, that when you shared your story about what you'd been through to even just believe in yourself.
Totally. I guess I'm not understanding the question. Is the question in regards to me thinking where are they at, or where am I at to be in that position?
Yeah, more where they're at.
Where they're
in terms of whether.
And, yeah, so like that happens a lot. I think context really matters, and I think that, recently I released a video of the work I do with at-risk youth and troubled teenagers called Everything in My Power, and the byproduct of that has just been, dozens of people, parents emailing me asking me to talk to their kids. I had a call last night actually, and I don't know how to serve them because I'm the kid, not the parent. And then one part just crushes me inside thinking when I hear a mom say, I don't know what to do. It's been 2 years. My son's addicted to cocaine and he says he wants to take his life. That is tough. And I realize it's the same thing with business, and it sounds weird. And to me, business and entrepreneurship is the ultimate personal development program. So when people try to disconnect those two things. I just can't. I know that I'm here today because I had a forcing function called the capital markets, and I wanted to create, and it didn't matter how cool I thought my idea was. If nobody wanted to buy it, they weren't going to buy. And I had to learn how to sell, and I had to learn how to market, and I had to learn all these things. So to me, no matter what thing they want to learn how to do, it's got to be paired with what's the belief around that today that's not going to serve them. So I can teach them something. And so with the parents, it's that they're enabling their kids to be that way, and they don't want to see it. And it sucks, but I gotta play tough love with the parents to say, walk me through the context of where you're at, and I'll walk you through exactly the mistakes you're making in the approach, because you're essentially like, no judgment, but I mean, she allowed her son that just got out of the psychiatric ward to take their family car to go drive around and visit friends. A self-proclaimed crack addict driving a vehicle. And I just had to show them how that didn't work. So I guess in the context of business, it's the same thing where a lot of people talk about, I got a call one day about a guy, and this guy's a very successful entrepreneur, but he wanted to build a $100 million a year company in 3 years. I think a lot of people would dismiss that question. How do I do that? And I said, we're going to get on a call, and for 20 minutes, I'm going to deconstruct it for you just so you can have an idea of what it looks like. But at the end of it, I think he realized what he was really asking. And it wasn't, how do I build a $300 million a year company? It's, how do I create a life that I love? You know what I mean?
See, that's the why, right?
That's the why.
And I guess that's what I'm getting at, not to interrupt you, but when I saw you talk, you were there, advertised to deliver a presentation to a bunch of professional speakers on creating content that converts. There was an expected result of Dan Martell is going to come and teach me ABC so that I can apply it and I can achieve X, Y, Z. But the way that it was positioned was, I'm going to show you all that. Here's who I am first. So, and what you just said a few moments ago about business and entrepreneurship being the ultimate personal development program. It's my belief, Dan, that what we might call a purple cow in business is just a business run and consistently acted upon by people who know authentically who they are and who they are not, flaws and all. They're not trying to copy everybody else because they're not interested. They know who they are, and they're going forward with a mission. You strike me as somebody who is authentically inside his own skin and has scaled business because of that, and not the other way around. So I can't help wondering how much you wonder about the why. I'm asking the same question over again, but it's just intriguing to me.
So the why always matters. It's to me, behind every question, every strategy, every tactic, there's a motivation to accomplish, right? And if I can't understand the motivation behind that, then I can't serve the person, because there's some kind of belief that they have that thinks that that's the right strategy. I mean, most of the conversations when I coach, I coach very successful, high-performing entrepreneurs. Most of the time when we're talking, I'm trying to understand the strategic principles and decisions they made to get to that question.
Yeah. So
that we can understand if that's even the right thing to do. So the why and the motivation, I guess it's core to everything, because there's also a sense that I've learned over the years that the right thing for X person is different than the right thing for Y in the exact same scenarios based on who they are and what motivates them. Right? Like that's really important. And I love what you said about the business leaders that are creating some of the greatest companies in the world today. They do it as a byproduct of just being unapologetically themselves. They do themselves. They know what they love. They see a future that's a little different. They have a different approach to it. And their culture, their company, their environment, their office space, the way they run their management meetings, everything is going to be represented based on that. And what's funny is I'm weird. I'm driving here from the airport today, and I'm looking at all these businesses, and I'm thinking to myself, it's weird. I actually think, who's the operator? Who's the CEO? And what's the heart? Yeah, because I know that when I see the signage that there's a certain type of person that I can tell by even the way the buildings are maintained, the kind of thought process that person probably has. And it's been a game for me. I've talked to thousands of entrepreneurs, literally super fortunate, fly around the world, keynoting, talking. I like to stay and talk to the audience, and I've started to see patterns of kind of their decision making and the results in their business. And some people, it's just interesting. If at the end of the day, I feel like I'm here on earth to do two things. One is deconstruct business strategically to help some of the best leaders make better decisions, and two, help at-risk teenagers, troubled teenagers, those that feel disconnected, to build their confidence through building business. And not because I think everybody should be an entrepreneur, because I think that business is the context of creating and capturing value. That's the way I define business, is the ultimate gift that I'm best suited to give.
So let's go back in the timeline. Thank you for landing this plane exactly where I was hoping to take it back off again, which was teenage Dan Martell, where we started the conversation, and computer programming comes along. What was it about that you knew was just that resonated with you in a different way that really drew you in the way it did?
I think it's always been about building, right? And building systems. It's weird that when I was even, a young kid, like 10, 11 years old, that I wanted to build tree forts and snow forts. I grew up in Canada and we had a lot of snow. So, the summer times I would try to rally the neighborhood kids to help me build tree forts. And my brother even ended up with a permanent scar in his hand from this ingenious system I created of pre-nailing the boards on the ground, because when you try to nail boards on tree limbs up 40 feet in the air, the tree limbs bounce. So when you're swinging the hammer into the nail off the wood, it actually doesn't allow it to stick in the branch. So we were pre-nailing, and then we built this jimmy rig of pulling up like a piece of rope on a swivel to pull the pieces of wood up, and somebody let it go, and he's climbing the tree, and it hit him with the nail that was protruding, because that's the way, I've just always done that. I'm the guy that built, snow cabins and then charged 25 cents to people playing them. Like, and people, oh, you're a real estate guy. It's like, no, I'm a systems guy. And when I came across software, and that's why I did good in biology when I actually focused a little bit. I understood math. There was something about it that worked for me. And when I got exposed to programming, and I realized that, and there was something, what the most elegant part of coding was, that to this day I don't take for granted, is that when I solve the problem once, it will always be solved that way for the rest of life. And that, in this crazy world, is a beautiful thing, right? Because as a leader, now that I've built multiple companies, and having to continuously convey my vision and try to get people and deal with emotions and help them make decisions with software, it's kind of like binary. As long as the function returns X, it'll return X every time those parameters are sent to it, and I never have to worry about it, so I can move on to the next higher level order of function or complexity. And that was probably the thing that resonated the most with me, is just how, for somebody that came from a lot of chaos growing up, how unchaotic programming was. And it became my new addiction. How
then did you connect the dots between really immersing yourself in that and then becoming that first step in the entrepreneurial journey?
I just took the same. I've always built. I've always created. So all I did was take that new tool, right? I call people building software today tool builders, because they're the modern day tool builders. Like back in the day, you built the wheel and a chassis and whatever, but now it's all in zeros and ones, and it's programming, right? And so I just got lucky that introduced to it in 98, that it couldn't have been a better time, and I think honestly today is just as better of a time than it was back then. There's definitely more exponential technologies available to sink your teeth into. It was just going and learning the challenges that I was facing and thinking, how can I build a solution around that? So the first thing I ever built, even before, technically I guess it could have been a business, but I don't consider it one, was an app that allowed me to give my friends an install on their computers to download my MP3 list so they could build their mixed CD burn, because I didn't want them on my computer sifted for hours through my MP3s. I downloaded off Napster, right? And then that way they could order a $20 mixed CD that I could burn while I was sleeping. And it's rudimentally super simple. If somebody's listening, it's like Visual Basic code in an FTP site with a file. It's super simple, but it was just I don't want people on my computer using my internet. It's back in the dial-up days in ICQ. And spending hours trying to put together a mixed CD for their partner, their girlfriend, their boyfriend. So that was the first thing I ever built. And then I just kept building more stuff. I built a site to host the photos that I was taking with I think it must have been it wasn't a megapixel camera. It was just super old school, but I wanted to have I built a GeoCity site and coded the HTML so that my images would load so I could send links to my friends that were on the trip with me. And I just kept building stuff for myself. And then finally, the first thing I ever built was my dad asked me if I could build a web page for his cottage rental. And the creator entrepreneur in me thought, how many other people are there like my dad that want a web page that don't know how to create a web page or get a page for their cottage. And I asked him, and he said, well, there's quite a few of us, you know? And I was like, oh, cool. So I told him the hosting was going to cost like $500 a month, because I needed the money. I was 17. I needed the money to actually buy the infrastructure to host the application that ended up becoming maritimevacation.ca. So that was the beginning. And I remember the first time I ever got $1. I essentially asked a marketing lesson. I couldn't figure out how to find these people that had cottages for rent. And a friend of mine said in passing that there was this tourism guide for the province that had a listing of all the Airbnbs, all the bed and breakfasts and cottage rentals. And then I paid my little brother Mo like $3 an hour to enter it into a Microsoft Access database, and did essentially what was direct mail, and created a form letter in Word and mailed out a ton of requests saying, hey, there's this new site called Maritime Vacation. If you want a listing on there, just send us $30 and 3 photos and fill out this form, and we'll return back a link to the URL that you could send to people. Because what's happening is a lot of people are calling my dad asking the same 10 questions. Yeah. When's it available? Do you allow pets? How close is the beach? Blah, 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 blah. And he wanted a page. And
the old FAQ, huh?
Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine, like back in the day. So 2 weeks later, mail started showing up in my apartment I was living in, and my dad just looked at me and said, what did you do? Because there was actually cash in those envelopes. And that was the first time I really made money through the internet for somebody that wasn't my cousin, my family member, good friend. And that's the day I realized I went pro. And pro to me is making $1 on the internet from somebody you don't know. And that's a day to rejoice. And that sparked everything to, you know, the 30 plus companies I've invested in today as an angel investor, the multiple companies I've built and exited, the millions of dollars I've raised in venture capital, and really became the foundation for how do I serve those that are still in that tough spot for me. And that's why I do a lot of work with those kids. And it's not even tech. The cool part is they want to build a t-shirt company. They want to build a lawn care company, a daycare, whatever it is. I just help them think through how to create. I just think there's something powerful to learn that a lot of humans don't ever, many people never get to the point where they create art. I really look at business like art. You create it, you put it out to the world to judge. That is a very small number of people that ever do that in their life. And that's what I think is missing for these kids, because their self-worth is near zero. And I see greatness. Like, I can't tell you, when I'm talking to this mom last night that's just struggling with her kid, or I'm hearing about, you know, a social worker saying, I meet a lot of kids like you and they don't turn out like you and they don't get it. And I just start names, faces flash in my head. And I just think, you don't see it, but I would. Like, I've never met a kid. I don't care how bad they were, what just happened, how angry they were. Like, I just know that at their core, they've got something to give to the world. And more so those kids than the normal kids, because those kids give no Fs whatsoever. And that is their special power, is that they don't need anybody's approval. They gave up that a long time ago. And what they have inside of them is an anger that could be redirected to a creativity and an output that most people wouldn't even understand how to contain. And they've got it. Like, they've got fire in their belly that most people could never even connect with. And if you can just channel that, that's where magic happens. So, like, that to me is, you know, everything I learn, I feel lucky because I think it's the best way to learn. Every book I read, every video I watch, every conversation I have, I always, in that filter of listening, is how can I teach this to those kids?
Tell me if I'm wrong, Dan. When you enter into something, there's no halfway for you. I mean, emotionally and in a manner of connection. And what I'm getting at here is that when you're listening to a mother talk about, you know, the difficulty that her son is having, when you're in front of a group of teens, when you're talking about software and scaling and entrepreneurship and everything like that, the energy just, the sincere energy just bleeds out of you. And I've written down a number of words. One of them was responsibility, where you talked about, you know, when that light went on for you, and that it almost felt, my words, not yours, but almost kind of overwhelming about, now, what is this going to mean, the choices that I'm going to have to make? And then as you started to get into business and as you started working with other people, and they were revealing to you things that are very heavy realities in their lives, that they're coming to you. That's a lot of responsibility. What I'm wondering about is how you're able to be as sincere and caring and giving of yourself as you are, but still knowing where that rev limiter is to protect yourself so that you can not so completely deplete yourself emotionally as to not be able to help the next one that comes along.
Yeah, I guess, Kevin, I don't have a rev limiter. I mean, that's the short answer is I don't. If anything, I have to throttle my enthusiasm for their greatness to not scare them. That I know that's probably more possible to happen and happens more often.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Oh, I'm sitting there this morning on my flight. I get this email from a different woman. Her son's blah, 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 13 years old, and he's now 19. He's been in foster care, doesn't know what to deal. And my response is just so like, I don't hold back. Like, I'm intense. Like that's probably the thing that if you talk to anybody, like if you came to me and you had, and I'll come back to that story, I had I'm a business partner in a gym, and his mom, the mom comes up to me one day and says, my goal is to do a pull-up. And I said, great, by when? And she's like, well, I don't know. I got to lose 40 pounds. Awesome. When are we going to lose the first 5? And she's like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, cool, let's build a plan. And she's like, and I'm like, look, I care about you because you're my business partner's mom, and I'm not going to allow you to let yourself off the hook. And if this is the time and you look in my eyes and you tell me it's now, I will do everything I can inside of me to make sure you hit that goal. So are we game? Are we doing this? And she's like, okay. And I got a date. And I call over my buddy and I said, your mom's going to do a pull-up by May 31st. And she's going to lose 5 pounds by, 1st of December. And she's going to work with a nutritionist. And we built a plan. And that doesn't deplete me. That's what's crazy, is that energizes me, because there's something I almost, I guess people say, like, treat others the way you want to be treated. That's how I want to be treated. That's how my good friends are with me. They call me out. They hear those things. They challenge me. Are you thinking big enough? Are you thinking about this area? So when I get an email from a mother, saying I don't know what to do with my kid, and I figured you might be able to help me, and my response is, I don't know how that must feel. It sounds tough. That was the second iteration of the email, by the way. The first one was a little bit more direct. I had to ask my buddy Jarrett sit next to me to read it and give me some guidance. Because again, my original one is stop enabling him.
So you don't have a rev limiter, but you do have a responsible filter.
I have friends that I've realized now that my especially in the written word, I think I can get away with it in person because they feel it.
Yeah,
but definitely in the written word, I have to edit a little bit. But I don't hold back because there's nothing. I guess it's one of those things where I don't enable people. I think a lot of energy gets sucked out of you when you're around people that make excuses. And I call it the lighthouse versus the tugboat. The tugboat is they see a ship that's going off track and they're always trying to bang into it, hit it, get it going in the right direction. They're trying to say, look at my example, look at me, try to do that, be me, be me. I don't do that. If you saw me speak, I'm just showing them possibility. And as a lighthouse, if some of them want to then follow up like you did and interact and have a conversation, then that's what we do. But usually those people that are willing to come to that stage, we're sharing the same level of values and approach to life. And all I'm doing is supporting them on that journey. But I have no patience, and I will not accept somebody sitting in front of me with a ton of excuses that aren't willing to be accountable for their life. You said responsibility. Yep. That is probably the ultimate gift that I got out of being at Portage, is that I'm 110% accountable for my life, regardless of the things that I didn't control that happened to me, because I do control how I react to those things. And that's hard for people to swallow to be like some people. But Dan, how am I supposed to be responsible for my parents leaving or this happening or this abuse or this? It's like, you're not, but you're 100% accountable for how you've allowed that to show up in your life. And I'm not saying you're supposed to wake up and be a perfect citizen. I'm just saying you should decide to be on a journey of improvement. And the only person that everybody's ever competing against is themselves from yesterday. And I think that makes life a little bit more approachable and like a pill they can swallow, and says, look, you're not competing against me in my life and what I've accomplished, or Kevin or anybody. You're competing against you from yesterday. So can we both agree that you could make 1% improvement today than you were from the person yesterday? And if so, guess what? 72 days, you've doubled. That's exciting. And that's all I ask. That's everything. And if people can't meet me there, then I'm good. The beauty of producing the amount of content I put out, which is all over, like literally my dad called me one day and said, hey, have you ever Googled yourself? Because, I think my uncle told me, he's like, you should search Dan's name on the internet. Is I get to create content for people at different stages in their life. And when they email me, like this mother, I can send her a video to my specific, and that's why I think that the verbal word for me is a lot better, because they can see and feel, hopefully through the video, the way I'm thinking about it, and it's not being abrasive or not caring. If anything, I care so much that I'm not going to allow them to play those mental games and those shitty beliefs that are slowing them from really, especially when there's kids involved. Like that's the unfortunate part, is anytime I see a child that's suffering, I know that there was a circumstance or an environment that they came from that's probably not that supportive. And one of the big things they need to learn, and the people that are trying to support them, is they got to change the way they've been doing it, because clearly it's not getting the results they want.
How does being a dad, how has it affected you and your journey overall?
It is probably one of the most top things that have, I mean, one, I remember the day my first son was born and realizing for the first time in my life that I'm going to be involved in creating something that's going to live way past my time here on earth. That was really beautiful. That was the ultimate business. That not only longer than my time here on earth, multiple generations, based on how I am as a dad and how we parent and how we create the environment and the skills we teach and prioritize and kind of focus on, that's going to have multi-generational impact. That was huge. And then for me, it's always like, okay, well, how does this apply to business, and how does this apply to the way I give back in my community, and how can I create that kind of one question I like to ask myself is, what can I create today that will be around in 300 years? Right. And that's just a really powerful question that helps align people's, passion and purpose in life. And so that was a big part. And then I would say just, watching the way they learn, my kids, obviously being Canadian, they started playing indoor ball hockey, and just watching the way that the coaches, I never played team sports, clearly. Well, at a young age, I was involved in other kinds of stuff, so I never got into that. But watching the way they taught the kids and deconstructed the lessons and the outcomes, and the way they, taught them something hard and then celebrated the small wins, I just found like watching my kids learn has really helped me understand how the work I do with my team, because essentially I'm creating high performers. Like that's the way I think about it. I'm not trying to build a family. I think some companies talk about we're a family. I create high performing teams, no different than a football team or a basketball team. And that means there's coaching involved. And I think learning through the lens of my children as babies, of the different ways you teach babies skills that eventually, again, compounding impact, that over time you can see some incredible gains that they end up creating. You know what I mean? So to me, I think that was probably the most powerful thing, is just watching how they learn and how I can use those moments to teach other people and or inspire. I mean, I do I don't do a whole lot that isn't teaching other people stuff. And I think I've become a better teacher because of my kids.
Well, I was wondering if you were going to go there, because there's something that I noticed a little while ago when you were talking about the two purposes: deconstructing business, helping at-risk teens. I'm generalizing it. You said more than that. But when you talk about business and software and entrepreneurship, and you're enthusiastic, and obviously you're right into your zone of excellence and whatnot, and happy to share. And I've read a lot of things like with the clarity sessions that you're doing, that you want to, it's a mission to just give away everything that you know to help empower people. When you start talking about helping teens, now I'm going to get emotional, your body language changes. It's just another level that maybe I'm thinking, okay, well, if there is a rev limiter, we might start to catch it. You can see it. I can feel it sitting right across from you. Am I wrong about that? Am I sensing it the wrong way? Okay, he's shaking his head. No, I'm not wrong. So I'm curious about when that light went on for you in the journey, and how, if at all, being a dad helped show that to you.
Yeah. I made a commitment to myself when I was 16. This was right after the day before I was driving high on drugs and drunk in a stolen car, and ended up taking a detour off the highway to get some gas, and there was a random roadblock, and pulled up. Cops asked for driver's license and registration. I told them I forgot it at home. They asked me to pull over, and I stepped on it and I took off. And I decided before I stole that car, I didn't want to go back to jail, and whatever happens, I had a handgun in a bag sitting next to me. I was going to pull the gun and let the cops do their job. I ended up going into a neighborhood, and the police were actually quite far behind me, and I saw an open garage door, and I thought, if I can just get in that garage door, close it, maybe I can get away. And I came around the corner way too fast and ended up smashing into the side of the house. And as I was kind of coming to myself and realizing what just happened, and I went and I started trying to reach for the handgun that was sitting there in the bag, and as I was pulling on it, it got stuck between. It was the bag was stuck on the armrest in between the two seats, and the gun wouldn't come out, and I kept pulling on it. And eventually the door opened, the police grabbed me and took my seatbelt off, and my feet didn't touch the ground, and I ended up in the back of the cop car. And the next morning I woke up sober in a jail cell, and I just realized that I was alive, and I didn't expect to be, and somebody was clearly looking out for me. And if there was anybody willing to help me get through, because I didn't know what I was looking at that point. I definitely had some other charges. I was on the run. I didn't know if I was looking at 3 or 5 years in jail, and I just said, if somebody helps me get through this, I'll do everything I can to be a good person. And at that point, a good person was actually just not break the law. Like, that was the commitment. I was just like, I will not break the law. I will be a good person. And I guess it was after Portage and discovering computers and seeing some of the early success that I realized that I had the potential of doing a lot more than just being a good person. And then I said to myself, when I'm successful enough, I will tell my story. And I held that story in for 15 years. And I had an opportunity about 4 years ago today to get on stage. And the only reason, I give a lot of credit to a guy named Jason Gaynard from Mastermind Talks, the only reason I told that story was because the day I showed up for the event, he said, just wanted to let you know that there's a $25,000 prize for voted by the audience for the person that gives the best speech. And I was supposed to give a talk on marketing and business. And I knew damn well I was never going to win on that. And I had a story inside me that I've been waiting to tell that I hadn't told. And this is an audience of like Tim Fair. I mean, there's 150 very high level entrepreneurs, people I've known for years, never shared this, hadn't told my fiance at the time, this is a different life. I just never stopped hanging out with those people, built a different life, won business awards, was recognized as a top angel investor in Canada, had investors at the time, my company Clarity. Nobody knew this part of my life. And I decided to tell that story. And right before I get on stage, my wife stops me and says, "Hey, I just want to surprise you. My parents are coming over to watch your talk." I was like,
perfect.
I was like, can you please make sure they don't leave the room before I get a chance to talk to them? And I went up there and I told the story about almost taking my life and what I went through, and the people that showed up in my life, like Brian, that told me they believed in me. And it would be a great story if I would have won the award. I came in second. There was an incredible speaker that year who deserved it. But that was the beginning. So I guess what's crazy is I always knew it was there to tell, but it still took me 15 years. And I know that for a lot of people listening to this, they have their own story that maybe they feel compelled to tell. And this is what I started doing even before that moment, was just telling people one-on-one. And just I remember Lewis Howes, who's a good friend of mine, and he's open about this today. I shared it with him. He was visiting San Francisco, and I was living there, and he was staying at my place. And in the elevator up to my building, my condo, I told him the story. And then he shared with me that his brother had been in jail and as a kid, and that he wasn't ready to tell anybody, and he appreciated me sharing, but he asked if I could keep it, private. And I did for years, until finally, I'm listening to a podcast and he's sharing his story. And it's just, now recently with his new book, The Mask of Masculinity, he's inspired people that, he talked about his sexual abuse as a man. And I don't know, I just think that stories have such power to heal others, that when I got off stage and I had some of the top entrepreneurs that I've known for a while come up to me and say, that was the most powerful thing I've ever heard. Thank you. And not look at me like less than, but actually more than.
Yeah.
And 3 or 4 of people from the audience come up to me and share their story, because it wasn't that uncommon. Turns out that a lot of people had troubles with the law and addiction in their family. I just realized I didn't want to connect with people. Didn't matter if I was giving a talk at a CAPS on marketing and content that converts. I just didn't want to connect with an audience without them knowing who I am from that point on.
Keeping an eye on the time, we've got to get you on an airplane. I just want to ask you, I want to ask you lots more things, but we got a lot of runway ahead of us, the two of us here. What's it done for you overall, business, family, your own personal growth and development by setting that story free and owning it?
I think one is it allows people to get a sense of who I am. I think that was always my biggest concern is like, I'm very driven. I'm very intense. And I just feel like now they're like, oh, I get it. There's a reason why he cares about not wasting a second. Like literally I'm intense. Like I care about efficiency and systems. And so I think there's that part. And then the big part is the ability to serve. I mean, I just know that story is the reason why parents and kids listen to me, because they know, like, and this was crazy. For 15 years, I would visit Portage, the place that saved my life, the rehab center, 3 or 4 times a year and talk to these kids. I was one of their major donors in a major fundraising program. Like it was such a part of my life and I never talked about it. So like, I'm just thinking like the ability for me to fundraise, the ability for me to support the community. You know, I've now been invited to speak at numerous high schools and talk to thousands of kids. And that wasn't happening before.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of upset at myself for waiting this long, but at the same time, I'm not going to let a moment slip away. So that's my story.
I hope this gets into the ears and the hearts of the people that need it. Dan, thank you so much for this time. You really honor me and anybody that's listening by sharing, and I look forward to more conversations down the road.
Super grateful. Thanks, Kevin.
To learn more about and connect with Dan Martell, visit him on his website, danmartell.com. I'll spell his last name for you, Martell, 2 L's in Martell. danmartell.com. He's got a free email newsletter with all kinds of great information that goes out. You can sign up for it at danmartell.com. On social media, you can find him at facebook.com/danmartell, at Dan Martell on Twitter. And he's got an incredible YouTube channel where he just broadcasting incredible content and giving away all of the insights that he's acquired throughout his journey so far. YouTube.com/Dan V as in Victor Martell. Dan V Martell. I will make sure to link all of those from the blog post, the show notes post at noschedulemanpodcast.com on my website. This is episode 67, but by all means, reach out to and connect with Dan. You'll be glad that you did. If you like this episode and you want more information like this on being authentic and having what you do in business being an authentic representation of who you really are and succeeding because of that, dig into these episodes. Number 64 with Loretta Smith was awesome. It's called Get Real, Get Results. Tough business questions with simple answers. Episode 64. Episode 60, you're going to love. Jim Estel, who is the CEO of Danby Appliances. It's called Putting People First and Building Business That Scales on Doing the Right Thing. By all means, listen to Jim and his journey, kind of a kindred spirit, but with a slightly different energy than Dan. But the same principles apply. That's in episode 60. And episode 22, which was also re-released more recently as a special edition episode called Reinvention with Gare Maxwell. Gare actually was the one who introduced me to Dan. Gare and Dan go way, way back. But so many of these principles of navigating constant change and being in touch with who you really are, Gare explores in that conversation. And I would encourage you to listen to the special edition version of that particular episode, which is called Reinvention, because what I did in that episode is I added a new introduction to it that documented a lot of my experiences in the path and what had happened from the time that I met Gare to the time that I put that special edition episode together, simply by connecting with opportunities, saying yes to people like Gare and Dan and Jim and Loretta, who I just mentioned. And what happened to me when I got into the game and just allowed things to grow and evolve in an authentic manner, which I think plays right back into everything that Dan Martell was just talking about. So it's there for you if you want Reinvention, or go all the way back to episode 22 with Gare Maxwell. You can find all of those and all archived episodes of Journeys with the No Schedule Man worldwide on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, and at noschedulemanpodcast.com. If you're in the United States, you can find it on iHeartRadio and Google Play Music. If you'd like to connect with me, just look for No Schedule Man on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter. Visit me at kevinbulmer.com or noscheduleman.com. Takes you to the same place. You can learn more about my speaking, coaching, and other content and opportunities and events there. And if you'd like to be part of my online coaching community, visit theturtletribe.com. Theturtletribe.com, and that'll take you through a process that'll tell you everything about what that community is and how you can join for free for a week to decide whether you want to stay with us or not. I hope so. Meantime, thanks for listening. I hope to have you here again next week on Journeys with the No Schedule Man.
Just a little deja vu.